Okay, in this lesson, we're going to be looking at how we can structure text. So in the last lesson, we did see the bold and the italic and how that worked. And there's a lot of different tags that we can apply to apply structuring to the text. So we're looking at some of them right now. And some of this content, once I show you the source code, might be a little bit shocking. So take a look at the way this looks on the page. It looks nice. And when you open up the source code that's behind the scenes, it's really messy. And one of the things that I did want to cover in this lesson is how whitespace is handled. So notice that all of the whitespace between there, but we only have the one spot of whitespace when it renders the code out. And that's because of the way that the whitespace is handled. So no matter how much whitespace you add into your source code, when you refresh it, you only get that one space being rendered out on the page. So keep that in mind, and this is also something to keep in mind when you are writing your code to make it nice and neat so it's easy to read. When you have it like this, it's kind of all over the place. So typically within each element, we're indenting with one space using the tab, and then each level in, we're indenting so it's easy to read when we look at the source code. Also, when we look at the source code from the page itself, all of that white space is still there because this is just an file contents. All of the white space is present within the file. So going into the editor, and one of the other reasons that I really like using editors is that a lot of them will have different ways to clean up the code and make it more readable. And in this case, I'm using brackets, and bracket has a really nice feature. It's called beautify. So there's a few different beautify options with brackets, and I've added them as extensions. So under the extension manager, and the one that I'm using is called beautified. So I've done an install on it. You can do a search and install it. There's two different ones. I usually prefer to use the first one, but it actually doesn't matter because both of them will apply formatting to the text. And this is helpful for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So what you do is select the content that you want to apply the beautify to. So I'm going to do a select all, selecting all of the content, and then under edit, I'm going to apply the beautify. There's also shortcuts in order to apply that within brackets. And once I apply it, it makes it a whole lot neater. And you're probably saying, uh-oh, wait a minute. There's still some weird text in here, and I don't see that on the page. And that's because this is HTML characters. So you can also, for every character that you have here, there's an HTML character to match. So these brackets are not brackets within the source code. And of course, if you do include the bracket within the source code, sometimes this can be confusing with HTML. So if you do have a number of brackets, it's going to think that this is an HTML tag, and it's not going to include it properly on the page. So especially if you have some text in there, so if you happen to try to write the line break, it's going to apply the HTML tag instead of writing out the code. And that's where you need to use the HTML characters. And as well, if you don't have the character on your keyboard, there's a number of different characters. A great reference at dev.w3.org for a bunch of different HTML characters. And as you can see, there's a whole lot of different characters that you can include on your page. Some of them are nice icon images that you can use. Some also have the semantic meaning as well as the character code and the hex character code. So there's a number of ways to bring these. So let's say, for instance, I want to add a heart to my page. I can select the character code, go back into the web page code, and paste it in. And they all start with the and then the character code and the colon. And so none of this is actually going to get read into the page. This one here is just a line, space. So if, for instance, you want to have a number of spaces between some of your text, as what we were doing earlier with the space handling, if I want to add in a bunch of spaces, I can do this. And the only way to add in spaces, because within the source code itself, it's only going to count one space at a time. So you need to use the character codes. And these ones are for the brackets. And then there's some more spaces that are down here on the page. And there's also ones for backslashes. So these are, again, commonly used characters that you might use within your source code. So now let's take a look at the formatting of the various elements. And as we've already seen, there's the bold, the strong, the italic, the emphasized. So let's convert these into bold and this is just the B for bold. There's also the strong for strong text. There's the italic, which is just the I, and then the emphasized text, which is EM. So that will contain that emphasized text. I'm going to remove out the references to these as I add them. There's also what's known as the pre-formatted text. So this one is used when you want to apply additional formatting to your text and apply the pre-formatting. And I can refresh that. So that allows you to distinguish that text as pre-formatted text. There's also the marked text. And I'll just update these within the source code to apply the marking for the marked text. And then we also need the closing tag for marked. So what this does is this highlights the containing text. And I did have the dash there, so you can remove that. Small is going to make the text slightly smaller than the average text size. And again, it needs to be closed off. So all of the formatting gets applied to the text that's in between these. And this text within itself won't apply any line breaks or anything like that. So it will just have the text in line. So it's nicely done in order to easily add and apply it to the text. Let's use the delete. So it's loading, that's opening and closing, and then the opening and closing for delete. So deleted is the strike through where you have the line through the text. The inserted text, and I'll get rid of the dash there, get rid of the dash there as well. So when we refresh it, what it does is it underlines it. So there's different use cases for using these. The sub will subscript the text from the rest of the text. So that means that it places it underneath. The subscript will place it above. So that will place it above the normal text flow. There's the marked, which we've already done. There's also a block quote text. So this is used for block quotes of the text content. And what that does is that provides the spacing around the selected block of text. There's also underline. And then there's also the strike as well. And what strike does is it does the similar to what we saw with the delete, where it does a strike through of the content. So if we refresh it, the strike is striking the content through. And you see that there at the bottom. I'll add in some extra spacing there, so move up the content. So we've got the strike through. Big is, of course, very self-explanatory because that's going to make the content big. So any of the content contained under or between the big tags is going to make it bigger as opposed to small where it made it slightly smaller. So it just makes the text slightly bigger. And you can pick and choose to use these as needed and as necessary. There's acronym. And the way that acronym works is content contained between the acronym is going to be slightly separated and formatted out. There's quoted text. So this is just with Q in order to indicate the quoted text and puts the quotes around it. So you can't select it. So this is a little bit different than if you had regular quotes. So it looks slightly different because with the regular quotes, you can actually select them as text. And with the quoted text, it applies the quotes into the formatting. There's also cite. I'll make this smaller. So this is just moving it up and so that we can see it properly. So what cite does is it cites the text contained within the cite. So it applies additional formatting once again, making it stand out slightly. It does this kind of italic. So it does look like similar to the italic or the emphasized text where it creates it on an angle. And then lastly, we're going to look at code. And what code does is this allows you to write code-like code within those tags. So between those elements and making the text look more like it was very basic kind of text formatting, changing the font style to be more in line with what you would expect to see with code. So I know we've gone through quite a bit. And remember as well to make sure that you use white space accordingly in order to structure your content. And all of these can be used. They all have their time to use them. Most of the time it's bold and italic that you're going to be using, and as well as underline. And these are more the typical ones. And some of these other ones you don't use very often, but it's good to know that they're there and good to be able to apply them when needed. So now it's your turn. Try them all out and see what happens with the text when you wrap them with the various tags that we've gone through in this lesson.